Hey, customers, welcome back for another episode of Special Screening. Today we have a huge guest. He's a writer, producer. You've definitely seen his work before. He's the writer of my favorite movie of all time, The Drop. Dennis Lehane. Dennis, how you doing today, bud?
Good to be here. Thanks.
I'm glad to have you on, man. Like I've said, The Drop is by far my favorite movie. I used to watch it every weekend before I would work as a bouncer, so
Yes,
it's
that's
definitely
great.
ingrained. Yeah, so I've had that movie. I mean, I've had the poster on the wall in our house for years. It's by far one of my favorite movies.
Oh,
For
that's,
sure.
that's sweet. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
But enough about my favorite movie. You did pick a movie for us this week, which is the Grand Budapest Hotel. Um,
Yep.
so, first of all, what makes that movie one of your favorites? Like, why'd you choose that for us to talk about today?
Well, I think it's a movie that continually fascinates me because um, this is a movie that's um, it's the funniest tragic movie ever made, and it's the warmest, but it's a really sad movie. It's a very what it's about is the end of 19th century ideals of civility that were just absolutely laid to waste and run over by the barbarity and brutalism of 20th century warmongering and nationalism and genocide. But it's told with this incredibly light touch. The movie's funny, it's fun, it's spry, it's really nimble. It's quotable for days. It's one of the great scripts, and yet at the end of the day, it is you can feel the 100 million people who got wiped out for ideology in the 20th century in every frame of the film. I mean, it's an amazing balancing act. I guess that's it. If I wrote the Grand Budapest Hotel, it would be dark and depressing and just a brutal look at atrocity. Wes Anderson does it, and it somehow manages to be again warm and light, and yet so dark and so sad. I don't know what else to say. It's one of the most humane movies I've ever seen. It's and it's in it withstands the ultimate rewatch test. You can fall into it wherever you find it, and you get sucked right into it.
Mm-hmm.
Come across it. It's like Goodfellas that way. It's like Midnight Run that way. It's like The Godfather that way. If you're flicking channels and you come across Grand Budapest, no matter where it is in the movie, you're sucked right in.
Yeah, I mean, this was my first time watching it myself, actually. And all I could think about is it really is like a crime drama. You have like what you're talking about with World War II and all that stuff going on at the background and just how dark that is. But it does have that Wes Anderson touch where you just feel a little bit, it's light the whole way through when there's all this darkness, just one step behind the camera, like one step there.
And he has a history of that. I mean, Rushmore is about a depressed kid, and
Mhm.
The Royal Tenenbaums is about a depressed family, and yet it's a strange thing. There's a moment in Tannenbaums, which is when Richie Tannenbaum attempts to commit suicide. It comes out of nowhere. It seems to come out of nowhere, and yet you feel somehow, oh, I guess, yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm shocked, but I'm not surprised because the movie has been about sadness, but it's all the tone and the touch of it throughout. But he's never done it, in my opinion, to the degree that he did it with Grand Budapest. I mean, to me, it's a perfect movie.
Yeah, it is pretty great for sure. I definitely enjoyed it the whole time we watched it. We actually made sure to watch it last night, so I had it fresh in the mind for this conversation. And man, it was great all the way through, like you're saying. I mean, you even have Willem Dafoe playing such a dark character, but every time you see him, it almost doesn't feel completely dark. Just the way that Wes Anderson shoots everything, and the color work that's in the film as well.
Yeah, and that hilarious, motorcycle chase and all. So strange. And it's funny because, early on in the film, it's one of the more famous lines in the film. Early on in the film, M. Gustav says, there are still faint glimmers of civilization left in this barbaric slaughterhouse that was once known as humanity. Then he says, indeed, that's what we provide in our own modest, humble, and oh, fuck it. That's what he says, But then much later in the film, Mustafa, who, the adult Zero, says, there are still faint glimmers of civilization left in this barbaric slaughterhouse that was once known as humanity. He was one of them. What's more to say? I mean, it's a beautiful wrap up to, that that all that is lost in the film, the people who are lost, the ideals that are lost, it's what they stood for that is what you hang hope on.
Mhm. Well, since you brought up a little bit of the writing style here, has it had effect on your writing style going forward since you've seen the film? You
Oh
are a
God,
much
no!
darker writer.
I saw
Like,
I saw the film like 3 times the summer it came, the fall it came out.
Mhm.
No, it doesn't affect my writing at all. My writing is pretty much, there's a certain type of writing that I can do that's very funny, but
Mhm.
it's not Wes Anderson funny. It's not Wes
Yeah.
Anderson touch. It's not the same thing at all. No, it doesn't. I'm way past the point where seeing something can influence me.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, this you do have a much darker writing style that you can see throughout your work for
Oh,
sure. Then, but you did do, I believe it's called "Small Mercies" is your newest book. Is that
yep,
correct?
yep.
You do have a little bit of humor thrown in there as well. But
Yeah, Small Mercies is very funny. Which it needs to be because the main storyline is so dark.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's a voice. There's a narrative voice in 3 of my novels. It's the same guy telling the story. It's the person who tells Small Mercies is the same person who tells The Drop, is the same person who tells Mystic River. It's the same narrator,
Mhm.
and he's funny. He's just funny. The Drop is a funny book, not a funny movie. It's got a couple
Yeah.
of friends in it, but it's a funny book. And Mystic River, which is not a funny movie at all,
Mhm.
has humor in the book. There's humor in it that never translated to the screen. So, but again, it's a different type of humor. It's a more caustic, urban, off the cuff type of humor.
Mhm. Well, you talk about The Drop. The humor in The Drop's very subtle. I always think of the Chechens and the Chechians
Yeah, Ireland.
conversation between Bob and Marv.
Yeah, and he
You
says,
know,
people from Ireland, Irelandians.
yeah, that's the first thing that comes to my mind when you talk about humor in that movie. God, I really love that movie. Sorry, get back on subject of
Oh,
Grand Budapest.
we had a moment once we cast Gandolfini, I opened up the character of Cousin Marv, and once we cast Tom Hardy, I just pared down all his dialogue because Tom thinks better on screen than almost any actor I can imagine, and just to have Gandolfini say my lines was such a delight. And we had this one scene, man. The scene's still in there, the tiny bit of the scene, but it was so friggin' funny, and all their focus groups said to cut it, and we were like, that scene gets the biggest laugh at every screening we've shown, but their focus groups were like, no, we didn't get it. And to this day it haunts me because Gandolfini just killed it. He just absolutely killed that scene.
Yeah, can you elaborate on what the scene is, or
there's a scene where Eric Deeds shows up at the bar and he says, "You got any Zima?"
Mhm.
And in the earliest cuts, Gandolfini's response is, "Who are we going to serve it to, Moesha?" And everybody burst out laughing. Anybody who understood the early '90s got that reference, right? Moesha, Brandy, this TV show that was on at the time, and the focus group said, "We don't know who Moesha is. We don't know who Brandy is. We don't know what that is."
Really?
And so they killed the line, and I was like, "Damn, that was the funniest line in the movie," and it got a huge response every time.
Well, that same scene is when Tom Hardy is wrapping up the arm, correct?
Yes. No.
That's a scene that stuck with me for a long time, just because growing up, I watched my father actually wrap meat like that.
Really?
Yeah, that's exactly how he does it. And then I showed my current girlfriend the movie, and she had seen like when my dad's packaged stuff for me, and just been like, "What the fuck? Like, is this what your dad like?
Yeah.
Why does your dad pack it like this?" And just couldn't help but make that connection,
Yeah, when I was writing the book, when I was originally writing the book, all of a sudden I remembered a bar where I used to drink at when I was really early 20s and in my neighborhood, and they would cut meat in the back. And so I was like, oh, I can use that. That'll work.
Yeah, it's perfect. That's exactly what, like, it was perfect. So when I saw that, just, oh yeah, I've been watching my father do that for my whole life. Just like that. So with Grand Budapest, is there like a favorite scene that really sticks out to you that, you think about the movie, like that's what you think about?
See, this is why the movie's so great. There's dozens. I think my all-time favorite though is Willem Dafoe's death scene. I think that it's supposed to be Gustav. He's supposed to die. He calls him a louse. He basically, it's an angry shout out at all the fascists and all the horrible thugs in the world. And then he starts to, as Willem Dafoe is stomping on the edge of this cliff that he's hanging on, so he'll fall off. And then he starts reciting one of his poems. The whole movie reciting one of his poems. And at that moment, Zero comes up behind him in the middle and chucks Willem Dafoe off the thing. So in the middle of this incredible, like, flowery poem, all of a sudden he says, "Holy shit, you got him." I love that moment.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I mean, they really kind of throw in the slapstick of how hard he pushes him. He like goes flying off that cliff.
Yeah.
Like,
They got him. Yeah, there's just so many great, right at the beginning, one of his first speeches, he says, Gustav says, rudeness is merely expression of fear. People fear that they won't get what they want. And that's really what the movie's about. It's all about rudeness versus civility. And then he says, the most dreadful and unattractive person only needs to be loved and they'll open up like a flower. And that's untrue. That's unfortunately untrue for Gustav, is that, when he tries that with Franz on the train, it doesn't work. He tries it with various people. Sometimes it works. It works with the big, with the big behemoth who has the scarred face in the prison, who ends up saving their lives when they escape. He gave him an extra mush. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he said, "Here, salt your mush. It's quite good." And he treated him like a human being. So it's one of those films it's impossible to articulate its greatness, which is what for me makes a great film. I mean, I could go on and on about Kurosawa's High and Low, and I can go on and on about Godfather 2, and I could go on about Apocalypse Now, and I could go on about Midnight Run, which is one of my favorite movies. But what you can never truly tap into is why exactly they're great. Greatness is indescribable,
It's a great way to put that. Yeah, it is really hard to describe. I mean, like, I have a hard time describing why I love The Drop so much to people, but it does it for me. I love that movie. So it's hard. It's just locked in as great, and it's hard to describe the greatness that you see sometimes, like in that movie.
It is. Like, I talk a lot about I think one of my absolutely favorite films is The French Connection, and I can give you a graduate treatise on why the movie is brilliant. I mean, I've seen it enough times, but it still doesn't quite explain what separates it fully from so many other cop films. Just the greatness has to be seen. It has to be experienced,
So you've brought up The Godfather twice with us here.
Yeah.
Are you a Godfather 1 or 2 guy? I got to know that.
Well, Godfather 1 is the more entertaining movie of the two, but Godfather 2 is, in my opinion, the greatest American film ever made. Like, that's the difference between that's the difference between a favorite. That you were asking me, what's my favorite? What's the greatest American film ever made? I think hands down it's Godfather 2. I don't think there's a close second. And you can say Citizen Kane and Casablanca all you want, but to me, Godfather 2 is the masterpiece. Godfather is wonderful. It's so rich, and it's a great film. It's an absolute great film. You would put the two of them in a top 10 any list.
For sure.
2 is just, I mean, it's the entire American immigrant experience, the entire history of the mafia. It's Shakespearean in terms of Fredo and the death of Fredo. It's a masterpiece on every single level. And there's little things in there. I'll give you a great example. Next time you watch 2. Notice every time in the flashbacks when each of the new children is introduced, right? So Vito's kids, right? He's building kids. When Santino is first introduced, he's placed on the rug that they've stolen. The first crime he's ever. So he's literally dropped into a life of crime, and he cries. He's placed on the rug, cries, and they fade out. The first time you ever see Fredo, Vito's watching, he's sick, and they're putting candles on his back. He's like TB or something. And Vito's just watching. And you realize from that point on, he'll always treat that child with kid gloves. He'll always overindulge that kid. Fredo will be weak. And then the third is after he kills Finucci, it's the first murder. He's got blood on his hands. He's destroyed the gun. He walks back through the Lower East Side, and he picks up his son and he says, Michael, your father's here.
Mm-hmm.
And he baptizes his child in blood. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing film.
Yeah. So you brought up the favorite versus, because there is that, like, what's the right answer for your favorite movie is supposed to be, like, people would say The Godfather and stuff. That's why we really focus here on what you picking, like Grand Budapest, and that being your favorite. Something outside of just like what people think they're supposed to say.
Yeah, it's what gives you joy. It's like Bull Durham's a movie I adore. These are movies that if I'm in a bad mood, or if I've had a really rough week and I go down into my little basement and I want to watch a movie to cheer myself up, I've seen Midnight Run, I would say conservatively 30 times.
Yeah.
Because it just makes me feel good.
Yeah, and Midnight Run is a lot of fun.
It's a wonderful piece of movie making. So it's not like you're just sitting there saying, you're not picking Scary Movie 3, but you're picking good films, but they're not necessarily high art.
Mm-hmm.
Although I would say Grand Budapest is high art, but they're fun. They're just so much fun, and they're rich, and they're wonderful characters, and endless dialogue, great dialogue. I mean, that's what I feel like when I see Bull Durham or what's another great rewatchable? Goodfellas. I mean, you can watch Goodfellas 50 times. You never get tired of it.
Yeah.
And it's a great film. So, yeah, there's a lot of, I'll give you a great example. I think another great film is The Verdict. But I would watch The Verdict about once every 6 years. Mm-hmm. And it's a great film. I think it's one of the great American films. But it's not one I'm just going to be like, oh, let's just pop in The Verdict and chill out.
Yeah.
That's a favorite movie.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you get into It's a Wonderful Life or Princess Bride or Casablanca. You know what I mean? That sense of I can just chill out and let this film flow over me.
Yeah. Something that you can sit and actually enjoy yourself watching instead of like almost like homework when you start getting into these like favorite, like these supposed to be best films. It must become like a lot. They're more stoic in how they're presented and stuff. A little harder to get through sometimes that like you can see yourself almost feeling like it's a project to go sit down. And I mean, I love The Godfather as much as the next person, but every once in a while I'm like, I really want to watch it, but it's 3.5 hours long. And do I really have the time to sit here?
3.5 hours.
One's 3, two's 3.5.
One is the 2:55, I think.
Okay. And then two's 3.5, right?
2.5. Two's a battle.
Yeah.
But here's the perfect example. We had a conversation a long time ago about this. Me and a group of friends. It was like me and David Simon, George Pelicanos, and Laura Littman. We were talking about the great rewatchables. And here was a very interesting thing we came upon. Out of Martin Scorsese's films, Casino is imminently rewatchable. You can just get sucked into it no matter where you find it. Is it a great film? No, it's not. But it's incredibly watchable. Taxi Driver is not. Taxi Driver is a masterpiece. And yet you come across it on TV and you got to be really in the mood. You know, it's grim. And so you're like, that's the difference between something that's rewatchable and fun and something that's great, but not necessarily, you got to be in the mood. You got to be in the mood. Watch Seven Samurai left and right.
Yeah.
I can't watch Ron. Kurosawa is one of my favorite directors, but I can't necessarily like watch most of his films. I think except for High and Low, I can't watch most of his films. Just, I'll come across Kurosawa on TV and keep watching.
Well, I could definitely see the Grand Budapest being one of those films for me now that if I see it, just throw it on. Like even if it's just background, just to have it on because it seems very rewatchable. And like you're saying, every scene's pretty great and you can just always like kind of pick it up and watch it from anywhere and keep going, Yeah,
it's line after line after line. I popped it on a couple of days ago, just had it in the background just because I knew we were doing this conversation. And I was like, it's just endlessly quotable, You're shaking like a shitting dog. It's just amazing.
There's just the funny moments, like right when they get out of prison. The first thing is he's just Ralph Fiennes' characters is going after Zero about not bringing the perfume with him, and they're sitting there for so long just talking that finally the guards realize that they're gone.
And the other prisoners have already taken off on the bus.
Yeah, you have Harvey Keitel.
But there's also that's when Zero tells the truth about his family being slaughtered. Mm-hmm. That's what it's in the midst of that crazy scene. And then he says, then he says, "You are my brother, you are my partner, and you will be with me for life." And then he says, "How's Agatha?" And he begins to recite back a poem to him, and that's when the alarms go off.
Yeah.
And he's like, "We have to go right now, but that's absolutely wonderful, and I want to hear the rest of it later." It's yes, man. I'm such a fanboy for this movie.
Well, that's good though. That's what I mean. I'm fanboying over your movie, so that's what we do here. So besides Grand Budapest, you've had like your, you had Mystic River, which is, I believe, one of your first works that became a film from novel. First of all, what was that like? How did that feel, seeing, the adaptation process of this novel of yours?
It was fast. I'll say that. It happened like a bullet. Clint Eastwood came out of the woodwork. I had parted ways with my agent at the time, my film agent. I didn't want to sell it to the movies. And Clint ultimately tracked me down, and we got on the phone, and he convinced me over the course of a few conversations that he would absolutely honor the work. That he wouldn't change the ending, that he wouldn't make it, what he said was, "I get that this isn't a crime novel. I get that this is a classic tragedy." And I said, "Great, awesome." We agreed on the screenwriter. He goes and gets that screenwriter, and boom, they were off to the races. I mean, between finishing that book and seeing the movie was less than 2.5 years.
Wow, that's a really fast turnaround. Yeah.
That's super fast. So the book came out in early 2001. The film was released in September of 2003. So it was great. I mean, it was wonderful. Clint couldn't have been nicer, couldn't have been more of a gentleman, wanted me on the set all the time. He contacted me really early on, put me in contact with all the major actors. And so that was what I never understood, was amazing training for me now that I'm a showrunner. Because I spent a lot of time with Sean Penn, a lot. And Sean is obsessively curious about the characters he plays. So he would spend hours with me talking about Jimmy, the Jimmy that didn't even show up in the book, the Jimmy that didn't even reach the book, the history of Jimmy Markham. Markham is his name in the movie. It's Marcus in the book. And it was wonderful. It was just great. And then Clint came on, shot the movie in record time. Had me on the set for the final shot, which I thought was really fun. And then I just learned so much about watching the way he worked, how polite he is, how calm his sets are. He's an absolute gentleman, and was just a joy to work with. And then the movie comes out, and I had no feeling about what the movie was going to be. I'd seen it, but I couldn't judge it. I was like, I think it works. I don't know. Then it came out, and then we got all this incredible praise, and then it goes to the Oscars, and then it wins 2 Oscars. And all of that was, by the time the Oscars, it won Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor at the Oscars. That was exactly 3 years to the date of its publication.
Yeah, wow, that's incredibly fast. And you bring up the Oscars. This film was nominated. There was 5 total. There was a winner for Best Actor, Supporting Actor, nomination for Best Supporting Actress. You were up for Best Picture, and then it was also up for Best Adapted Screenplay.
Yeah, Brian.
I was kind of curious how that is. Like, what's the feeling for you when you see your story get adapted, and then the person who adapted it gets nominated for an Academy Award for something that's your work originally?
Hell no. No, I'm sorry. I got to disagree with you there.
Oh, no, I'm just asking what your feeling is about it, not if it was bad or anything.
Brian turned a book into cinema. There's 2 different things. The award for the Academy Award is for cinema. And what Brian did was he took a 400-page book, which was very dense in terms of interior monologues, in terms of thinking. There's not a lot of action on the page in Mystic River. It's a lot of thinking. Brian had to distill that to cinema. He had to put that into visual language, and he did in an amazing way, in a way that I never could have done back then. I'm so glad I passed on writing the script.
Oh, did they offered it to you first if you wanted to do the script?
Offer it formally. Clint discussed it with me. He just said, "Do you have any interest in adapting this?" And I said, "No, I'm the wrong guy for the job." And Brian had just did he win? I can't remember if he won or not, but he had just been nominated for an Academy Award for the adaptation of LA Confidential, which was spectacular. So we wanted him because he was clearly very good at adapting what many people considered an unfilmable book, which was LA Confidential. So no, I think what he did was the great adapters. My hat is completely off to them. Guys like Steve Zalian, people who can, Brian, people who can take these monumental works and I think Eric Roth just did Killers of the Flower Moon. I mean, those are, it's a real art to know what to keep and what to throw out from a book. And I would never have been able to do it with Mystic River. I could do it with The Drop, and I could probably do it with Small Mercies, but I don't think I could have done it 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, now, I mean, you just had Blackbird that came out last year. You're adapting a true story.
Yeah.
And, you're the showrunner, so you're getting final call on everyone's scripts that everybody's writing. So how does it feel working on something that's nonfiction compared to most of your other works of crime fiction?
Yeah, nonfiction was weird. Because I had just done 3 Stephen King adaptations back to back, and that you feel like Steve and I know each other. He knew he was in good hands with me. He knew I would respect his work at the same time that I would have to break bad on various things, but the spirit of his work would stay intact. But you don't have the same latitude when you're telling somebody's life story. I mean, that's tough. So I had to get to the point with Jimmy Keene where I said, I'm going to go off now and do my thing. I got to ultimately go off and tell a story. And I will retain as much of the true facts as I can, but I am going to have to, I'm going to have to imagine things that aren't in the book that were never discussed, or I'm going to have to collapse, say, 6 characters into one, things like that I had to do, that you have to do, and that's why you say inspired by a true story. You don't say a true story. So that's the best we could do. And the best I could do was to honor what Jimmy's journey was, and to honor his incredible courage, and to honor the fact that he did it specifically to get an early release so he could spend time with his father before his father, who was not in good health, passed on. And that was, to me, the story.
You do talk about changing the story a little bit. What was the decision to change his father from being a fireman to a police officer?
Well, his father had been a police officer at one point.
Really? Everything I saw about him was him being a fireman. It was like,
no, he was a police officer too at one point.
Okay.
So he was a police officer, and then he was a fireman, and then he was a businessman. So again, I'm trying to tell this this story that I don't think even Jimmy grasped in some ways, that his father was a deeply flawed man, but loved his son, absolutely loved his son. And so I wanted to look at the flawed guy, which is why I got Ray to play the part, because nobody could saddle that line. Ray Liotta spent 2.5 hours playing an absolutely irredeemable sociopath in Goodfellas, but you don't feel that way at all. Watching him, you're like, Henry's not great, except for that time he strangled his girlfriend's boss. So it's nobody to me could play that part except for Ray. So I wrote it for him, and there was a real richness in that portrayal, and Jimmy was very happy with that portrayal.
That's good. Yeah, he did a great job in this series. I mean, the whole series was fantastic. You know, I'm really glad I watched it, and I've been telling people, and everybody's telling me how great it is. I mean, you kind of have a filmography, man. That's like every time I look at your stuff, it's like, wait, you did this too? Like you worked on The Outsider, which I enjoyed the book a lot, which is Stephen King, like you've said, and then the show was great as well. You're just kind of everywhere doing fantastic work, man. So I just really want to compliment you on that.
Thank you. I think the key here is and it's how I decided to sell my books and to whom I sold them. I want to be in business with talented people who want to do good work. That's the line. There's not much more to it than that. And so I pick people to work with who fit that. Look, the money's going to come, I guess, if you do it well, but it's not. The money isn't the object. The money isn't the answer. Can we do good work? Because my dad was, your dad was a butcher. My dad was a foreman at Sears and Roebuck for 30 years. He didn't enjoy going to work.
Mm-hmm.
He did it to put food on the table for his family, and he was proud to do that. But he gave me the ability, the great American dream. He gave me the ability to then choose a profession that I love and do that profession. Mm-hmm. So if I'm blessed enough to do that, then I have to honor it. And by honoring it, I mean, try to only do good work. Never take the cash grab jobs. Never do something just because you can, and they're going to help you put a pool into your house. Mm-hmm. Do it because it's good work. That's how I started on The Wire. I remember my agent at the time saying, now that you're doing well with The Wire, we got some really good stuff we could get you on a network. And I'm like, I don't want to work for a network. I'm like, you mean commercials and shit?
Yeah.
You mean like writing to the commercial and all that, crap? No, I don't want to do that. I want to do this incredibly low-rated TV show on HBO that nobody knew about at the time. Trust me. Mm-hmm. We became The Wire at the end. We weren't The Wire in season 3. Nobody even knew what we were. So it was really a wonderful experience always when you work on a project you love and you're excited about it.
Yeah. It's always about finding something that it becomes not like work and you're just enjoying what you're doing. I do have to say this, though. You could do with this what you would like. My father was not a butcher. He was a union representative for the Teamsters. So it's just
this whole story.
It's just a coincidence that he does it. It's just how he always did it at home with stuff. Okay. Was exactly like that.
Okay, I'm sorry. He was union. Was he a union delegate like Henry Hill?
More like Hoffa. Like when The Irishman came out, he was sending me like the commemorative ashtrays that Hoffa used to promote his stuff.
That's great.
So, yeah, no, I was telling you the story because that's exactly how my father would do it. But I thought you'd think it's funny. He's actually a union representative, which comes with all that stuff as well. So what got you really started in writing crime dramas? Like, what do you find feeling about that genre?
I think it was because I was always interested in social issues. I grew up really hardcore working class. There was a lot of crime in my neighborhood. Mm-hmm. I think I remember my first sort of socially conscious thought was, wow, it seems to be in the best interest of the rich to keep the poor fighting amongst themselves. Mm-hmm. And you see that playbook playing out right now across this country, across the world. And so the place to write about that was in the crime genre. It's just ready made for it. Mm-hmm. You can investigate all sorts of questions about society, about the haves versus the have-nots, about justice, whether there is such a thing in this world. All of that you can do through the crime fiction genre. So I had been trained both as I was self-taught for a long time. And then ultimately when I went off to college and then grad school, I had come in with a really good knowledge of both crime fiction and pulp fiction. And then I studied much more esoteric and literary fiction. And now I think I'm like the bastard son of the two influences, like pulp and literary fiction fused together. And that's me. And I can't get the pulp out of me enough to satisfy the literary crowd. And I can't get the literary out of me enough to fully, make me not a little suspect with the pulp crowd. So, but it's, I think a writer should never be comfortable, to be honest with you. I like the fact that I don't really belong anywhere. It keeps me, it's the Pacino line, keeps me sharp on the edge where I got to be,
Do you think that combination has led to like why your stuff works well and has done so well in the film, like doing films and television? Like, do you think that combination of pulp and literaries helped like make?
I think it's hurt. I don't think it's
You
hurt.
think it's hurt?
No, I don't. I
Oh,
don't.
Okay.
No, I don't think it's hurt, because certainly what you see is people's response to Blackbird. This was one hell of a year I've just had. So people's response to Blackbird and then Small Mercies has fallen right along those lines. Wow, we've got two incredibly propulsive stories, but they're about far more than just what is the surface storyline. Blackbird's not about a guy who goes to prison to get a confession out of another guy. I mean, that's kind of what it concerns, but it's not what it's about. And Small Mercies isn't just about a woman who goes and tries to find out what happened to her missing daughter. It's about racism, and it's about hatred, and it's about the devastating cycles of poverty. So I think the fact that people have really got that in the last year, I mean, has felt really gratifying, because that's what I do. I don't want to write anything that feels like homework or making you eat your vegetables, right? But when I was a kid and I didn't like peas or whatever else, my parents, but definitely peas or broccoli, I put it on my plate. What I'd do is I'd cover it in mashed potato and then I'd shove it in, because at least the mashed potato would make it taste okay. Put the mashed potato around the vegetables. That's my writing. And I want you to get your vegetables, but they're not the most important thing coming in the door. Important thing coming through the door is the taste of the potato or whatever you like. And that is, I think, the propulsion and the characters. I do know I don't take credit for much. The two things I'm not falsely modest about or modest at all about are I do know I write really good dialogue, and I do know that I create very interesting and vivid characters. Those are the two things.
You really do. Like, that's exactly what's going to be my next thing for you, is you've written such great, like, multi-dimensional and complex characters. Like, could you go through like your writing process and how you're able to create these characters that people really grab onto?
I think it always starts with the best people have a beating heart of pure evil somewhere inside of them. And the worst people have positive traits. That's very hard to get your head around, but it's true. And so every human being is a paradox. Every human being is not just one thing, which is what I hate about our culture right now on both sides of the argument, which is you got to just be your one thing. You're defined literally by one act in your life. And I'm like, no, you're not. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be shamed or scolded for some things, but that doesn't, it's your whole life. And if you look at, say, perfect example, Schindler's List, Oscar Schindler, this was a guy who was a war profiteer. This was a guy who made millions off slave labor, and in the end became one of the great heroes of the 20th century. It's just kind of like, that's interesting to me. That's really interesting to me. And so when I write characters, I don't really judge them. I think that's the key. Don't judge your characters. Just let them be. Let them tell you who they are. Put them in your books and or your scripts. Let them be exactly who they are. With Mary Pat in Small Mercies, I know right off the bat, I was like, this woman is a foul-mouthed, chain-smoking, alcoholic, racist who doesn't understand how racist she is. And I am not going to shy away from any of that, period. I'm going all in. Like, whereas if I had backed off that a little bit and been like, let's make her a little more likable, you would have sensed it. It would have been false. She's fake. That's not real. And so that's what I try to do with all my characters, is just let them hang out, warts and all. Let the audience, let the reader judge who they are. Let the
Yeah.
create real people as much as I can.
Yeah, I mean, so what do you find to be like the most difficult aspect of writing crime fiction and stuff like that? Like, do you find anything in particular that's very challenging for you?
No, what I find hard has nothing to do with crime fiction.
Mhm.
What I find hard with fiction and prose is how to describe a room, say,
Mhm.
while keeping the movement of the story going, and that can be really difficult. So the example I give is there's a scene in Live by Night, my crime book, my 1920s prohibition book, where he goes to the opening of a hotel in Boston looking for somebody. He's supposed to meet somebody there, and he goes into this big gala opening, and it was based on the actual opening of the Statler Hotel, and the descriptions inside were drawn from actual newspaper accounts of the time. And he moves into that crowd, and I have to show you everything he sees as he's moving through the crowd, right?
Mhm.
I do. And that scene took me like 2 weeks to write, and it was a bitch. Every inch of it was a bitch because I had to just say, okay, here's what's going on over here, but he's still moving. Here's what's going on over here, but the action's still happening. Here's what's going on over here, but she may appear up on that balcony. All of that.
Mhm.
If I wrote that in a script, it would be interior ballroom night. That's it.
Yeah, and that's it.
No moves through the room. That's it. So when people say what's harder, screenwriting or novels,
Mhm.
it's one of the most ridiculous questions I've ever heard, because novels are brutal. Screenwriting is, for me, mostly pretty easy.
Do you think so? Did you started your career with novels or with screenplays?
No, novels.
With
Novels.
novels. So do
Novels.
you think that maybe starting with that transitioning into screenplay, it just seems so much easier because you started at such a harder medium?
No, because I didn't take naturally to screenwriting either. It's
Mhm.
I believe in the 10-year rule. When I first started working on The Wire, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and I can't believe they put their faith in me, and they worked with me, because even though I'd written 6 novels by that point, I hadn't written any teleplays. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know about film literature is, by its very nature, it's literary. It's internal. Film is pure image. TV, everything is image based.
Mhm.
And so it's not about what the character is thinking, it's about what the camera is seeing, period. And that takes a long time to figure out how to do. It took me about another 10 years to figure out. I'm not saying I didn't get some good scripts in, I'm not saying I didn't get stuff produced, but it was after The Wire, after Bloodline, after Boardwalk Empire, after a couple of other shows I consulted on behind the scenes, before I was writing for Mr. Mercedes, when I went,
Mhm.
well, I got this. Yeah, I got this. Now I know exactly what I'm doing. But that was 10 years.
Yeah, so it's just about putting in the work and kind of
It's all about
the
putting in.
time. Yeah, once you get the time going,
Yep.
get going. Um, so can you share any details about current or upcoming projects that you have going on? And like, how's the writer strikes has affected
Yeah,
you and
I do have a
everything?
project that is supposed to go into pre-production, in like a month.
Mhm.
I can't really speak about anything because of the strike right now.
Mhm.
Um, but hopefully it's another Apple TV show, and we're hoping to go into production. But I gotta stick by my union. I gotta stick by my guys.
Yeah.
So we gotta see what happens. I had written 4 episodes and locked them. A locked script is nobody gets to touch it,
Mhm.
so that nobody would have to write on the scripts, and we could just shoot. But we'll see. We'll see what happens in a month, 6 weeks.
Mhm.
That's where I'm at. And then after that, I'm going to do the television adaptation of Small Mercies.
Okay. Is that going to be an Apple TV project as well?
TV.
Yeah. You have a contract with Apple TV now, is that correct?
Kind
Cool.
of. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll keep watching your stuff for sure.
Sounds
And
great.
we've enjoyed. Thank you for coming on. special screening.
This was great.
We really appreciate you coming and joining us. We'll be watching all your work as it keeps dropping and everything. And like I said, the drop's my favorite. So I really appreciate you coming to do this show.
Really appreciate the love, man.
Yeah, of course. Customers, as usual, thank you for stopping by for another episode of Special Screening. We'll see you guys in a couple weeks.